It is necessary in the sense that people who are in India and outside have to know what he has contributed to the Renaissance movement of India today, because you have to see him not only in the context of India, but how he has contributed to make India what it is, and given also the cultural background of India an international outlook. He is one of those rare leaders who have not merely struggled for freedom, India, but have tried to secure the freedom in order that a free India might be able to contribute to world culture. And they have tried to envisage, even while the struggle for freedom was on, to see what would be the form of a composite, synthetic, integral world culture. They have conceived of the world culture in advance, two or three of them, not all. All the political leaders were busy with the securing of freedom. They did not understand fully that freedom was not the goal, but freedom was only a means to, make possible the expression of Indian spirit or Indian culture in the life of man today. And if India was not free, India would be debarred from contributing her share in the making of a composite or a full human culture. And it was only two or three leaders who had this consciousness while the freedom struggle was on. Even in the last decade of the last century, 1893 to 1910 was a period when the struggle for freedom had just to take its root. In fact, it was, it had to struggle in order to get a full nationalistic color. Those who contributed to making the nationalistic philosophy, out of them, two or three had the vision of the future that we shall have freedom not for the sake of freedom, not for the sake of securing political jobs and economic self sufficiency, but to make it possible for India to contribute whatever element of spiritual culture she has retained and kept alive to the making of human culture, because there is a grounded belief in India that human culture could not be perfect if it is not founded on the deepest foundation of the human spirit. So long as a culture is only intellectual, only economic, only social, only political, well, it fulfills only the partial, the spirit of man. If a culture is really to deserve the name of great human culture, then it must found itself on the essential spirit of man, the divinity in man. Well, this is the foundation belief of Indian culture. How far India has gone in it is a different matter. But this being foundational belief, these leaders, when they were struggling for freedom, they had to see how Indian spirituality would assume an international form. And Sri Aurobindo is among the foremost, among the one that I know, the only one who has succeeded in giving a most international, rational, complete and convincing form of a future human culture. It is not an Indian culture which he is speaking of, but he is speaking of human culture as conceived by somebody who wants to found it on the foundation of the human spirit as an essential divinity. Well, so we go forward with this subject of India's Renaissance movement. With that object, he wrote a book called Foundations of Indian Culture, which I would recommend to those people who are keen students of culture, any culture, because it lays open the foundations of all the cultures, trying to give a comparative background and showing how culture would not be great or enduring or would not fulfill its highest function if it did not found itself upon the spirit of man. Well, that is the basis. This is a quotation from his book. I am appealing mainly to that new mind of India, which long misled by an alien education, view and influence, is returning to a sound and true idea of its past and future. But the return is far from being all pervading, complete or luminous as it should be. Same book, another quotation which is relevant is India is indeed awakening and defending herself. I mean, culturally, he's speaking of not fighting any battle, but cultural defense. Defending herself, but not sufficiently, and not with the wholeheartedness, the clear sight, and the firm resolution which can alone save her from the peril. Today it is close, Let her choose. The choice is imperative before her to live or to perish. Perish culturally, of course, means if you may retain your physical existence, as many countries have retained, Egypt is there, perhaps, but it is not the ancient Egypt, probably. It's quite another Egypt. The ancient Egypt of which we see the great, works, well, is no more there. It is quite another Egypt. You see, Rome, for instance, gave a culture, but if you find today, the Rome is quite different from what it was. I mean, the historical movement of man's growth has shown that cultures also, like man, live, grow, and then decay and die, and so on, unless there is a rejuvenating element, kept alive and brought back, and again capable of adjusting itself to new conditions. Third thing he is asking, and this is for the world, this answer is for the modern culture. This question which he is putting is for the whole of the world. We have a right to ask whether science, practical reason, and efficiency, and unbridled economic production, which makes man a slave of his life and body, a wheel, a spring, or cog in a huge mechanism, or a cell of an economic organism, and translates into human terms the ideal of the ant hill and the beehive, is really the whole truth of our being and a sound or complete ideal of civilization. Well, this is a question, I think, which is pertinent for even modern culture to ponder upon, and I think he put it to the Indian audience, but it is meant for the whole world today. I am myself also partly concerned with the movement of Indian culture. We have all participated in it in our young age, and we have not ceased to participate in it in the sense that we try to embody the elements of the culture which we believe should be now the culture of the whole of humanity, something that is founded on spiritual life. When I think of the subject, my mind goes back to the 90s of the last century because we participated in the movement in the 90s of the last century and the first decade of our century, 19 to 1910. The urge for political freedom was becoming irresistible. In my memory, I still see my old uncle scolding my elder brother, you see, Mr. C.P. late Purani, for holding nationalistic views as against the philosophy of moderatism. His arguments were logically sound. My uncle argued that you are being unpractical fellow British government over which the sun never sets and no organization, no army, nothing, and you want to take freedom. What nonsense you are talking, and so on. And I think he was quite right. The incident and the subsequent trend of events that followed brings home to us a great truth that intellect is not always able to give correct guidance, especially in moments of individual or national crisis. Something else, some other power in man alone can give him the light. The stalwarts of those days, a political struggle for India like Sir P.M. Mehta of Bombay, he was called the Lion of Bombay, G.K. Gokhale, the servant of India Society, who founded a great society in India, you see, disciple of Ranade, and others, men who certainly were patriots, were moderates. Moderates in the sense of being pro-British. You see, they thought that British Empire was nice and we can ask some rights and politely prepare ourselves slowly and get ourselves trained in democracy, you see. Their logic was indubitable. Their premises were not mistaken, only their conclusion was wrong. Their methods effete and foredoomed to failure. India, they argued, had never been a nation politically. It's a subcontinent of many groups speaking 24 languages nearly, unorganized, enslaved, disunited, poor. That's quite a complete picture, I think. A disarmed people without a living national consciousness could only slowly march to the temple of freedom, particularly when it had to challenge an empire over which the sun never sets. So their method was prayer, petition, and protest. Prayer to the British government. If they don't listen, petition. You see, yes, petition. And if they don't still do, protest against it on paper. As it turned out, it was always turns out in such great courses, it always turns out like that. Not failure, but low aim was their crime. There is a proverb in English, I think. It is a Frenchman who has given that. Not failure, but low aim was their crime. It is sometimes necessary and better to aim high and fail than to aim low and succeed. You see? Yes. It was not time for logic. There are times in the history of nations when logic of material fact has to be laid aside. And Sherwando in those days did concede to the moderate argument and wrote, this I am quoting, yes, externally we are nothing. He admitted that India was nothing externally, but he also argued spiritually we are everything. It was a time when there was a call, and a call to everyone on the nation, time when the mother called, as we say in India. And thank God there were her children who, disregarding all logic of facts, responded to her call and ran to her rescue, as we say, taking their life in their hand. The feeling has been vividly preserved in the now famous letter to his wife, to Mrinalini Devi, by Sri Aurobindo. And these letters were fortunately preserved by the, so unintentionally, of course, by the police, because the letters were seized in a case, you see, and they were produced in the law court. They were written private letters to his wife, and they were taken hold of, and the police produced them in the court. By the police in the Vande Mataram trial. He wrote in those letters, one of them, he writes in quotation I am giving you, where others regard country as an inert object and know it as consisting of some plains and fields and forests and mountains and rivers, I look upon my country as my mother. I worship and adore her as the mother. What would a son do when a demon is sitting on her breast of his mother and drinking her blood? Would he sit down content to take his meals and go on enjoying himself in the company of his family and children? Or would he rather run to the rescue of his mother? I know I have the strength to uplift this fallen race. It is not physical strength. I am not going to fight with the sword or with the gun, but with the power of knowledge. The strength of the warrior is not the only kind of strength in the world. There is also the power of the Brahman, the supreme reality founded on knowledge. This was a quotation from one of his letters. This logic of the soul of India with the small number of nationalists like Sri Aurobindo had followed in those early days. After there were 9 deportations, in those days British government used to pass laws which they could conveniently carry out their policy, you see. So in order not to appear arbitrary, they used to pass law and say according to law somebody will not be tried but simply sent away straight to jail. That was the law, like that, you see. And so according to that, some nationalist leaders were deported. After 9 national leaders were deported without trial from East Bengal, Jalakati conference was held in 1909. A photo of Ashwini Kumar Dutt, who was the deported leader, was placed in the presidential chair, and Sri Aurobindo, the only nationalist leader who happened to be outside, well, being acquitted from Alipur bomb case, declared from the platform. This is what he spoke in 1909. Great as he is, Ashwini Kumar Dutt is not the leader of this movement. Tilak is not the leader of this movement. God is the leader. He assured the audience, God is within you, and immortal power is working in you. This faith was common to all the nationalist leaders of that decade. They had an unquestioning faith in the ultimate victory, though there was no victory in sight at that time, you see. And they taught the nation self-reliance, self-sacrifice, and organization. Their patriotism had the fervor of religion. The farewell message which Sri Aurobindo gave to the students of the first national college in India in 1906 remains true even today for the students of free India. He said, work that she, means India, may prosper, suffer that she may rejoice. But it was no narrow patriotism or collective ambition. For even in those early days of political subjection, He declared the aim of the political struggle. What did he say? It is not to it was to save the light, to save the spirit of India from lasting obscuration and debasement, that God was raising the nation. Something must come from you, he told the Indians, which is to save the world. And that something also he further elaborated and declared in the following words. That something is what the ancient rishis knew and revealed. In the international field, they saw beyond the unity of the nation and envisaged the ultimate unity of mankind. That was it. And they said that it's a unity of equals that we want, not unity of the serf and the master. I'm almost quoting the words which he spoke in those days. It was a time when the national consciousness, lying dormant for centuries, suddenly awoke and in its dawn automatically emphasized the fundamental elements of her culture: a spiritual attitude towards life, a dynamic faith in the guiding divine spirit. Question is, what is culture? Culture, which is a collective creation, is not like a house built of bricks, wood, or cement. It's a mold of collective consciousness or collective life that organizes itself around values which are evolved during the course of its history. More truly, culture is a living organism that must change according to changing conditions. When a culture becomes rigid, unable to change, it becomes what Tagore called achalayatana, a house that cannot readjust itself to changing conditions, inert and a dead mass. Like all organism, a culture lives, grows, matures, decays and dies. But there is a difference which endows cultures with a power of longevity. It is a power of revival. A culture that is vitally weak goes down or either is destroyed or changed beyond recognition by impact of a more powerful culture. India came in contact with the Western or European culture and was dominated by it during the period of a decline. But the very impact of this culture, its ideas and literature, its political and social ideals, set into movement a powerful and many-sided revival of Indian culture. The most important element of revival were awakening of the religious spirit in new and vigorous forms, and the challenge to the political domination of England. Of course, there were many other things, literary revival and other kinds of revivals in the cultural field. In those early days, the only support which the political movement could count upon was that of the spirit, a faith in the spirit of Indian culture, a living faith in the destiny of India. That was the only thing that could sustain a man. The need for political freedom is not merely for securing material well-being. The chief aim is to have freedom for the expression of the nation's soul. Just as the individual has a soul, so has the collectivity or a nation. Nearly 30 years after the movement Sherunda wrote, each nation is a Shakti or a power of the evolving spirit of humanity, and lives by the principle which it embodies. India is Bharat Shakti, the living energy of the great spiritual conception, and fidelity to it is the very principle of our existence. It was the feeling and living out this great spiritual truth, the feeling and living spirit of India, that enabled the small band of nationalist leaders to fire the imagination of the masses, in fact, to transmit the flame from their hearts to the people and capture the political organization from the moderates. And later on, the same movement broadened out by emphasizing, through the great personality of Mahatma Gandhi, some salient ethical elements of spiritual culture of India, applying them to political and social problems, which led India to freedom and gave a new ethical weapon to the world for the solution of international problems. What is culture? We have tried partly to answer the question, but a further consideration may be taken up to make the foundations of a culture clear. There are two sides to a culture. One is the political, social, and external, consisting of institutions and codes and outer organizational body. The second is a spiritual element or basic element, inner factors of a living culture. The external forms have to go on changing according to conditions that are changing, adapting themselves to historical situations. The inner elements remain the same. The persistence of inner element is what gives permanency and maintains the individuality of a culture and makes it grow. An example would make this point clear. Let us consider the form with the will to freedom. Will to freedom is one basic element of collective life. Will to freedom, to maintain or to attain freedom. Will to freedom assumed in the course of Indian history several forms. In the 17th century, at the time of Shivaji, the movement of freedom started with a cry of Swadharma and Swaraj, freedom of religious belief and self-government. And the method that was adopted was guerrilla warfare. That was in Maratha history, you see, in the 17th century. After 3 centuries, the same will to freedom again awoke, burst forth with the cry of Vande Mataram. With the vision of free Mother India, and non-violent resistance or satyagraha was the method or technique adopted. See, after 300 years, the same will has come into expression, taking another form. So, in a culture, the basic element can remain the same, while the form that it takes can go on changing. You see, for instance, there was a time when in India, renunciation was regarded as a very important element of man's life. Now, when political freedom and struggle for it came, the same spirit of renunciation took hold of the people's mind, and hundreds of people renounced their property for Tilak Swaraj Fund. For securing self-government, hundreds of people gave up all their property. Now, the basic principle is renunciation, but the form it took was, participation in a political movement in order to free the country. You see, the principle of renunciation was reapplied in a different way. The earlier movement ended in establishment of Maratha Confederacy, falling short of united India, and now the last movement has given us a republic and a united India, though paradoxically it has brought a division of India along religious lines. Sri Aurobindo enumerates the essential element of a culture as follows. He says, the culture of a people may be roughly described as the expression of a consciousness of life which formulates itself in three aspects. First, there is a side of thought, ideal, of upward will and soul's aspiration. First. Then there is a side of creative self-expression, appreciative aesthesis, intellectual and imaginative work. And thirdly, practical and outward formulation and organization of life. So culture has three elements given to it to make a correct idea of a true culture. Content of history may be said to be man's search for harmony. What does history or evolution of man in history show? That man is seeking for harmony. And culture is the harmony of spirit, mind and body. A culture is the harmony of the spirit, of mind, intellectuality and the outer organization of life, body. Some form of harmony was attained by certain cultures in the past. We will take only two or three now. Say the Greek culture past, the modern European culture too, and ancient Indian culture, just for example. The Greek culture was a harmony of disinterested intellectual curiosity, aesthetic temperament which was quite flexible, a sense of form, a strong and a beautiful body, idea of a beautiful body. It was dominantly an intellectual culture in which man was conceived as a mind, as an emotional being and as an aesthetic being, and also a being that must have a strong and beautiful body. That was a concept. And they try to carry it out. This harmony they try to create in their culture and succeeded for a time. The modern European culture is the harmony of practical reason, not idealistic mind, but practical reason, scientific efficiency, and economic capacity of man. It takes these powers as the whole truth of the human being. The Greek mind was philosophic, aesthetic, political. Modern mind can be said to be scientific, economic, utilitarian. I'm quoting from some of his writings, a few phrases. The ancient Indian culture arrived at a harmony of spiritual mind, intuitive reason, informed by religious spirit, a living sense of the eternal and the infinite. During the struggle for independence in India, very few leaders saw beyond the political horizon. But there were some who saw that freedom was only a means and not an end, and that New India should emerge as a natural sequel. They saw that New India would have to meet the challenge of European culture, with its vital drive, its scientific discoveries, and economy-centric outlook. Indian culture is vast and complex, and it has been constantly building new forms, adapting itself to conditions, changing some, even destroying some of its old forms. At one time, it completely gave up Buddhism and outer forms of Buddhism which it itself created. See, it's simply Buddhism completely gone out of Indian culture, leaving aside the crop or the assimilated elements of Buddhistic culture in India. Not that it has produced no influence. It has very strongly influenced Indian culture. But the whole outer organization was changed completely. There is an all-round meeting, mixing and clash of values in the world today based on difference of cultures and historical conditions. And if Indian culture is not merely to survive, but to make its contribution to humanity today, it must rebuild the life of New India on her own spiritual foundation, adapted to the need of the scientific age. This is the reason why Sri Aurobindo, with his cosmic vision of the whole human history, writes at length about Indian culture, which contains some values which are indispensable to the conception of a perfect human culture. There have been various attempts in India during the past 60 years to rebuild the life of India on new basis. Few of them we can mention here, not all, but just a chief salient. Ram Mohan Rai, first, you see, that was in the 70s and 60s of the last century, you see, man who first began the reformist movement and also some idea of reawakening in the spiritual and religious life of India. Dayanand Saraswati, another spiritual figure who founded the Arya Samaj. Ramakrishna Paramhans, the third figure. Theosophical Society, Rabindranath Tagore, Jawaharlal Nehru, Sri Aurobindo. Take some rough idea of the movement. I mean, the revival which has been handled by great persons, and effort has been made in different channels to bring about, contribute something to the remaking of New India. These great men have tried to live, according to their faith, the aspect of Indian culture which appear to them the most important. And outline and approach and appraisal only can be attempted here. Dayanand Saraswati began his reform. He was earliest, you see, he was almost, in the middle of the last century. He began his work, and by 1800 and I think by 1890 he was dead. He died already. You see, he was cut short by his life was cut short very, very in his young age. Dayanand began the reformist movement really at the age of 13. He was a boy of 13 when he began the movement. Because he saw a rat going over the image of Shiva, there was an image made of stone, and at night they keep awake on the 13th day, you see, just to worship and continue concentration. And he was sitting with his father, you see. His father was a great devotee of Shiva. So he was sitting in the temple and this boy was keeping awake. All other people went to sleep after some time. You see, after 12 or 1 o'clock, they all tired out. And this boy was very earnest and eager. And he said that I must not sleep. God is here. And you see, I can't sleep in the presence of God. So he kept awake and he saw that the rats were coming and what was offered there, wheat or rice or whatever lying, was rat were eating. So he said, oh, no, no, I don't believe in that God. You see, that's how he began the reforms movement at the age of 13. He ran away from his house in the western part of India in search of the truth of Indian religion, and becoming a sannyasi, he studied the Vedas and courageously founded the Arya Samaj on the basis of the Veda. He said, Veda is the original book, all other books, he said, I don't believe in and I don't want to accept as authority. Veda, the first book of humanity and fountainhead of Indian culture, he gave a new interpretation to the Veda and discarded untouchability, encouraged widow remarriage, and tried to stop the mass conversion of the poor in India to Christianity. He wanted to revive the old Vedic society and Vedic culture as he understood them, and though he introduced many reforms in Hindu religious practice and society, he could not, being unfamiliar with the element and forces of Western culture, he couldn't see the necessity in the form of the synthesis that was necessary. He tried to found itself on the old Indian idea, change the traditional form and go back to the past if it was possible. That is what he was attempting. Not knowing the modern life and modern culture, he couldn't think that there was a synthesis necessary. You cannot go back to the past in the sense of revival. It's an impossible effort to go back in history. You can't go. Time you cannot reverse. You see, in time there is no reversal. That Indian culture was far more elastic and capable of absorbing and assimilating new elements and even forces of true culture didn't strike him. He thought that that is the only way to reform, you see. The life of this bold genius was cut short at 48, as he was poisoned by his enemies while he was serving the cause of Indian religion. He was poisoned by a state. He was in Jodhpur state and he made statement which some of the Orthodox people didn't like. And he spoke against the king, subjecting himself to drinking and so on. He said this is absolutely non-Aryan, that he shouldn't touch wine and so on. And the king felt very strongly. He was present in the meeting. And these sannyasis don't care for a king, you see. When they are real sannyasis, they don't care for anything. So he spoke in the open meeting and addressing the king almost personally. He said that what kind of Indian you are or Arya you are. You are a ruler and you are drinking and what is this? You have to become true Indian, you must give up all these things. And this was very serious. And so some of people who were interested in selling wine to him, and king gave up next day. King gave up, resolved, I won't drink from tomorrow. He felt. So, well, then he called him to his house and said that, yes, please come, I'm giving up everything. And well, this was very serious for the merchants and the other people who were interested in his going on with drinking, isn't it? And with his vices. So some of them were paid to poison the sannyasi. That's the story, and that's history. Well, he was killed by the poison program. Well, Sri Arunda has paid a growing tribute to Dayanand Saraswati in one of his writings. Arya Samaj is a reformist religious organization spread not only in India but in many foreign countries. The Gurukul system of education is an attempt to mold the future generations of Indians into Vedic Aryans, Vedic times. You see, they will put on, old clothes with going on like the old people, never cutting their hair till they're 20, and all rules that are found somewhere in some book in the past. Well, all the modern people, they will go to the laboratory, but with all that, paraphernalia of long hair and so on. Well, Gurukul tried to recreate that kind of education, and I don't think it has succeeded. It's still going on, but it is only a small thing. You see, it couldn't catch the spirit of the nation, you see. The attempt was not successful in overcoming the stress of modern European culture on minds of Indians even after freedom, and perhaps because its insistence on external forms of the ancient, tradition. Ram Mohan Rai, the second founder of Brahma Samaj of India, one of the great religious movements of Bengal and some part of North India, he is may be called an imitative reformer. If Dayanand is a Protestant reformer, well, he is an imitative reformer. He was among the first to oppose the blind orthodoxy of Hindu religion and to found the Brahma Samaj based on some ideas of Unitarian Church. He went to England very early in 1920 or so, 1820. In fact, in 1847 or 50, he died in England. He died in England, not in India. He was a member of the Unitarian Church himself. And he tried to found this Arya Samaj, Brahma Samaj in India on the basis of Unitarian Church of Europe and Upanishadic Vedanta. He tried to put the two together and found something. He worked at the great risk of his life for the emancipation of womanhood in India. One of his outstanding achievements was the abolition of the sati in the last century. Fatherhood of God and brotherhood of man was the inspiring ideal which he put before the Brahma Samaj. More than Dayanand and Ram Mohan Rai, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa represents the neo-spirituality of modern India and marks a stage in the evolution of Indian spirituality. Sri Aurobindo, even in 1908, paid a tribute to Ramakrishna in the following words. In Bengal there came a flood of religious truth. Certain men were born, men whom educated world would not have recognized if that belief, if the God within them had not been there to open their eyes. Men whose lives were very different from what our education, our Western education, taught us to admire. One of them, the man who had the greatest influence and has done the most to regenerate Bengal, could not read and write a single word. He was a man who had been what they call absolutely useless to the world. But he had this one divine faculty in him, that he had more than faith and had realized God. He was a man without intellectual training, such a man as the English educated Indian would have ordinarily talked of as one useless to society. He will say, this man is ignorant. What does he know? What can he teach me, who have received from the West all that it can teach? But God knew what he was doing. He sent that man to Bengal and set him in the temple at Dakshineshwar in Calcutta. And from north and south and east and west, educated men who were the pride of university, who had studied all that Europe could teach, came to fall at the feet of this ascetic. The work of salvation and work of raising India had already begun. That is in 1908 what he wrote. In another book, Sri Aurobindo spoke about Ramakrishna as one with a colossal spiritual capacity, taking the kingdom of heaven by storm. Ramakrishna taught the modern world that religion is a matter of experience, not of professing or believing, and that experience in all religions ultimately is the same. This is one of the fundamental truths on which any future world culture would have to be founded. A man without literary education, he is a standing challenge to the modern world, its skepticism, its atheism, and its materialism. Through him, the power of Indian spirituality, in its pure form, was effectively brought to the notice of the modern world. Ramakrishna and Vivekananda inspired nearly 2 generations of Indians when they were in bondage with self-confidence and pride in their culture. Ramakrishna mission organized by Vivekananda carries out that work today to the extent that they can, because it seems in modern time and recently there has been a more emphasis on outer social work for its own sake rather than on the spiritual elements which were really intended to be emphasized. Tagore's cultural contribution, Tagore comes after, see it is chronological almost. Tagore's cultural contribution consists of his unique literary output and his educational institution, the Shantiniketan. He burst into world fame with the Nobel Prize for Gitanjali. From the vast literature which he has created, it is possible to get an idea of his philosophy and his interpretation of Indian culture. The Upanishads, the works of the saints and mystics of the Middle Ages like Kabir, and the aspects of Vaishnava religion have influenced his outlook. He was a firm believer in international peace, and Shantiniketan, the institution which he started, was to promote this aim, and he pointed out the dangers of exclusive nationalism. He went to Japan and he spoke against nationalism of the Japanese. And the Japanese were so displeased that he left Japan in a hurry. He didn't remain. Yes, it was in the last century, you see. And he said that this is pride and what are you doing? This will bring ruin to you. This egoism and aggressiveness and this, you imitate these European small countries. You have your own culture of 2000 years. Why is it that you want to do what they are doing simply because you think that you will get what they have got and what they have got is something marvelous and wonderful and so on. He strongly spoke against aggressive nationalism and national egoism. And they were very much displeased. He also left in a week's time. He didn't continue his program. He went away to say, I don't care if you don't want to listen to what I say. Now, after the Second World War, they're quoting Tagore. You'll be surprised to know all Japanese people that you see this great Indian sage pointed out to us at that time. And now we have learned at our cost, you see, yes. Aggressive nationalism and what it shouldn't have done. Well, if they had just listened to him and molded their policy, probably they would have been much better now than they are today. Well, the history is like that. But he did point out to them. In his Gifford lectures, he worked out a conception of Vishwamanav, the collective man, a conception of a growing perfection of the human being through collective effort. His influence has largely been active in the field of creative literature and fine art. Today, his influence is more felt there. Mahatma Gandhi, the man who comes next, you see, through his long and active life has tried what might be called an ethico, politico, and economic integration of Indian culture. Ethics is the basis of his outlook. His book Hind Swaraj gives his fundamental ideas of life and philosophy. Simplicity, non-possession of wealth, self-control, service are some of the elements on which India should rebuild her life. And if others would listen, the whole of humanity also should rebuild the life accordingly. But he begins with India. He says, if I don't succeed in India, I don't have any chance in the world. He was very clear about it. He was invited, several times to visit Europe and America. He refused. He said, if my people don't follow me, I don't expect anybody else to follow me. And I think he was right. Yes, among religions, Jainism, Vaishnavism, and Christianity influenced him. Among leaders of thought, Tolstoy inspired Gandhi. The rejuvenated India should, according to him, rebuild her life on rejection of machinery, rejection of medicine in all forms except naturopathy, acceptance of absolute non-violence as the only method and one method for the solution of all human problems. This was his philosophy of life. You can put it without any mistake. He equates non-violence to truth. And his contribution to the winning of India's freedom is very great, for he led the Congress for 30 years in the political struggle with non-violence as its creed. And his influence on Indian public life is far-reaching. His political philosophy of non-violence has attracted the attention of the world in this atomic age. The integration attempted by Mahatma Gandhi stressed the social aspect of ethics and social aspect of religion. That was his emphasis. And he created a demand for purity and integrity in public life. His great stress was about integrity and purity in public life and social aspects of ethics and religion, which the ruling party in the country today is not able to satisfy. I must say that in reference to truth, you see that the Congress party is not able to carry it out. Fasting as a method of achieving public welfare has found its limitations now. Gandhi lays stress on the observance of yama and niyama, self-control and certain elements of ethical life, and wishes to achieve ethical values in collective life. One may mention one result of Gandhi's outlook which seems to outlook some fundamental values of Indian culture. In this stress for action or doing, the more important fact of being is neglected. Today, many in India do not feel Ram Krishna as a phenomenon, as a characteristic product of Indian culture, one who actually demonstrated that there is a divine element in man which is superior to his intellect and all his other faculties, and that knowledge can be acquired by more direct methods than by the indirect and unsatisfactory methods which are now employed for training of the intellect and senses. In the insistence on outer action, the need of rising or raising oneself to a higher consciousness is very often forgotten. This is one result of it, indirect though. Jawaharlal Nehru, the great Prime Minister of India, has certainly put an indelible stamp on the country, perhaps unintentionally. I say perhaps because it may be equally true that he may have arrived at not a stable integration, but a working or a workable outlook. And I would like to call that a secular socialistic outlook or economic secularist outlook, if you like to call it. You see. His Discovery of India, he has written a book called Discovery of India and Glimpses of World History. These are two good books which he has written. Give his vision of India and of the world in modern context. He is a peculiar amalgam of the East and the West. See, much of his upbringing is in the West. For long he was in Harrow. And in England, he is more English than Indian in his makeup, outer nature. I mean, not in his inner make, but in the outer make, he is very Europeanized. Very nice. It's a peculiar amalgam of the East and the West. And to those like Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya, one great leader who led Indian political movement for 40 years, and even to Rajendra Prasad, the president who retired now, it would sound strange that an Indian has to discover India. You see, they would be surprised that how is it that an Indian wants to discover India? Because if he would know it automatically, I think it would be in his blood, most probably. His acquaintance with and understanding of Indian spirituality is limited, Jawaharlal Nehru. That is why, though he is highly impressed by its popular manifestations like the Kumbh Mela, where 30 lakhs of people gather to take a bath in the Ganges, and the Yamuna, where they meet. There is a confluence of two rivers in the north of India, which is regarded as a holy confluence, and 30 lakhs of people, 3 million people come to take baths from all over India. And Jawaharlal goes there and is tremendously impressed. He writes one article, what a sight it is. It's an experience too. Now, it is something that has been done by nobody. You don't know who started this institution. And every 12 years it happens. Every 12 years on a particular date when the moon is in a certain position, people go and take bath at the confluence of the two rivers. Now, how did the people organize this? How did they bring it into effectivity? Today, when we hold a conference in India, if there are about 50,000 people to attend, it takes 3 months in advance to prepare everything. The ground, the level, this, that, tents and water and electricity and dining room and all that, 50,000 only. I have done in the Congress, you see, we attended 3 or 4 sessions and then I was kept with the volunteers. 3 to 6 months in advance we are working, you see. And 3 months after the session, everything to be set right again, accounts and people to be returned and this and that. And it takes your life out. And so money, expense apart, you see. The reception committee people breathe a sigh of relief. We are over now. Here 30 lakhs of people gather, nobody calls. There is no reception committee. There is no reception committee and there is no meeting. No unanimous vote to be passed. No party or nothing. You go there, take bath and you meet 10,000 people from all over India whom you can never meet unless you travel 7 times, go around. They are all present there. Jains are there, Vaishnavas are there, the Shaivites are there, the yogis are there, the sadhus are there, the saints are there, the rogues are there. You see, yes, the pickpockets are there. Yes, I don't say that all the best elements. No, everybody is there who can be there. And anybody who wants to know has the best chance of meeting whom he wants to meet. There is no fee. And everybody provides for himself. It's a cart that he has brought and he sleeps under the cart, takes his food somewhere and says, oh, such and such a Mahatma is a great yogi, I want to ask him. And then he goes, he sits down because it lasts for 1 month. So you can go anytime. And today if you don't meet him, tomorrow you go and say, I want to see. All right, you go and ask him. And he gives you advice. Now he has worked for 50 years, 40 years. He has followed some truth. And when you ask him, you get some guidance from ripe experience without any motive, without any selfishness. That is what has kept the Indian culture alive. There is no money in the country. Then how does culture go on living? Even the last man in the village, as Chester Bowles pointed out in his departing address, which was a very fine address, I tell you, it was one of the best that I have heard. Chester Bowles, when he was leaving his office, he addressed on the Indian radio the Indian public. It was a fine analysis of Indian culture, and he said that it is not money that is basis of the culture, but I have gone out and seen the laborers who have no house, who are living out absolutely in the open. And I have seen that in their life they have values of life which are really highly cultural. They have idea of right and honesty and straightforwardness, and they take delight in life and delight in work, which is very difficult for me to to square with their poverty and the abject conditions in which they are living. I can see because he knows the modern life, and he says they have not even the necessities of life. And people who are not having necessities of life, living in such contentment and joy and delight, working all the time, is something that must come from your culture, he said. It is 5,000 years of effort that has created this mentality in the poorest man, that there are values which we must respect even when we are poor. And that is a very great thing. He played a glowing tribute to this aspect of the culture. I am referring to Jawaharlal Nehru's being impressed by this Kumbh Mela, the 30 lakhs of people gathering together. He does not find it possible to canalize that tremendous energy for rejuvenating Indian culture or building new India. That is our misfortune. You see, that's what I consider something not at all very, very good for the country, because he could, being in his position, he could certainly give a lead. And this energy, it is colossal energy. They will rebuild on their own. After all, what is money? Labor is money. Work is money. Money comes from elbow grease. Yes, it comes from work. It comes from work. Yes, work is money, and you like 30 lakhs of people, you set them to work. Well, that is creation of wealth. What is wealth? That is wealth. Well, on change, freedom. It may be due to the urgent need of industrialization and his earnest desire to remove poverty from India that his mind is constantly turned to other countries whose technical and economic aid is indispensable, perhaps. India, under his leadership, may be said to have definitely given up Mahatma's opposition to machinery. That he did it even when he was alive, so it's not new departure. Mahatma had told him that if you believe, please follow your own guide. And 20 years before India was free, there was the planning commission, of which first Sir Vishwesvaraya, the famous engineer, was the president, and afterwards Jawaharlal Nehru. Next president was Jawaharlal Nehru. Even when Gandhi was alive, 20 years before we were free, well, the planning commission was already taking up the data of the coals and steel and engineering and what was to be done, and the damming of rivers and so on. They were planning already before. So the planning today is a result of a long-standing study by experts. For a long time they have been studying the problem, and it is not new. I mean, the giving up of the opposition to machinery is now 20 to 30 years old, and embarked upon a historic program of phenomenal proportion to rebuild Indian economy on modern European model. His great service to the country is the promotion of scientific knowledge. He has started 6 big national laboratories in 6 different parts of India, geographically. You see, eastern part 2, northern 2, center 2, and south 2, like that. He has 6 big national laboratories, quite up to date and equipped with the latest appliances. This is a crucial step fraught with immense consequences to the culture of India and that of the world. Of the 3 great men, Tagore, Gandhi, and Nehru, none believes in renunciation of life. Tagore seeks aesthetic harmony and delight in life. To Gandhi, life is austerity or penance, an opportunity to serve others. To Nehru, it's a noble adventure, an new discovery every moment. Yes, that's how we were to, just short, you're not giving a detailed study, but that's what it would come to. Some of these attempts at cultural rejuvenation seem to lack the very central springs of Indian culture, and these may be regarded as independent approaches to the problem of Indian renaissance. Sri Aurobindo's synthetic vision is cosmic, and has the merit of comprehensiveness and clarity. It points out the way to a new creation. I may even say to a new world culture on the sound foundations of the international foundations of Indian culture. We can put ourselves this question: is he a mere revivalist, only a proud nationalist who glories in the past? Is he merely an enthusiastic exponent of Indian culture and a mere intellectual? He himself has expressed his attitude, which I quote here. There is no real question between barbarism and civilization, for all masses of men are barbarians laboring to civilize themselves. He wrote in this book, Foundations of Indian Culture, on 93rd page. He does not assert that Indian culture is the highest and that the others are not needed or useful. There is need, he says, of divergent lines of advance until we can raise our heads into that infinity of spirit in which there is a light broad enough to draw together and reconcile all highest ways of thinking, feeling, and living. He admits the imperfection of Indian culture and says, certainly it was not perfect or final or complete, for that can be alleged of no past or present cultural idea or system. These cultures in which man lives are incomplete and provisional. This also from the foundation of Indian culture. Then he says, each culture has achieved something of special value to humanity. And he observes, mankind is no more than semi-civilized, and it was never anything else in the recorded history of its present cycle. So there is no question of his being one who is a protagonist only of Indian culture and is proud and so on. He knows very well. As for reviving the past or living on the capital of the past, he says, but to live on our capital without using it for fresh gain is to end in bankruptcy and pauperism. And he says to shrink from enlargement and change is a false conception of importance. It is to hold that India's creative capacity in religion and philosophy came to end in Shankar, Ramanujan, Madhva, and Chaitanya, which you cannot say that it has power of infinite rejuvenation. He evaluates the two cultures and their achievements in following terms. From the view of evolutionary future, European and Indian civilizations at their best have been half achievements, infant dawns pointing to the mature sunlight that is to come. He forecasts a very severe judgment of future against the present. The coming ages might look on Europe and Asia of today much as we look on savage tribes and primitive people. This is from the foundation, you see. Not only are there everywhere positive, ugly, and even hideous blots on the life of man today, but much that we now accept with equanimity, much in which we take pride, may well be regarded by future humanity as barbarism, or at least semi-barbarous and immature. He looks at the future and he says, but the real and perfect civilization yet waits to be discovered. For life of mankind is still 9/10 of barbarism and 1/10 of culture. In his epic Savitri, the great poem, the vision rises to prophetic heights and he says, ever the centuries and the millenniums pass, the eons ever repeat their changeless round. The cycles all rebuild and ever aspire. Huge revolutions of life's fruitless gyre. The newborn ages perish like the old. And as to man, he says, nothing has he learned from time and its history. A growing register of calamities is the past account, the future book of fate. The centuries pile man's follies and man's crimes upon a countless crowd of nature's ills. Nature's ills are quite enough, and man goes on piling his crimes and his follies upon nature's evils. Holding that human cultures are imperfect, why, we may ask, does he then take so much trouble to lay bare the foundations of Indian culture? Because, according to him, Indian culture stands for a truth, an indispensable truth of human life and its perfection. In spite of India having achieved freedom, there is still need for the defense and preservation of its fundamental values, for there is danger of their being neglected or destroyed. Other externally more powerful cultures have arisen and have challenged the basis of Indian culture. I believe there was a second reason also. Even great leaders in India today are puzzled by the baffling complexity of Indian culture and are at a loss to find the true foundations of Indian culture. There was need for a clear exposition of the integral foundations which would, in effect, be the international form of Indian culture. He declares the living aim of culture is the realization on earth of the kingdom of heaven. In Sri Aurobindo, the element of tapas, penance, and austerity is not lacking, for it needs a concentrated power of will. He advocates the need of international unity and peace. Harmony and beauty are, according to him, the highest attributes of God. In addition to all these elements that are common to the great leaders, there is one element and most fundamental, I believe, to our culture in which Sri Aurobindo stands apart. It is his insistence on founding life with the divine as the center. That is the element that he has in common with Ramakrishna. And I believe that is a central stone in the art of the ancient culture. Sri Aurobindo has put the ideal before the whole humanity because he sees it as the rational, not only rational but inevitable culmination of the process of cosmic evolution. And he points out that it is man's special privilege to be called upon to participate consciously in his own self exceeding. About the foundation of Indian culture, Sri Aurobindo says, spirituality is indeed the master key of Indian culture. And nowadays, the word spirituality is being used in a very vague sense and is interpreted variously, including at times intellectual idealism, ethical effort, even social service. We call it spirituality. It is true that all elevating activities of the human being do contain some element of spirituality. But with regard to Indian culture, he gives a definite sense. He says, spirituality has meant hitherto a recognition of something greater than mind and life, an aspiration to a consciousness pure, great, divine, beyond our normal mental and vital nature, a surge and rising of the soul in man out of his littleness and bondage of our lower parts towards a greater thing which is secret within us. The Indian idea of the world, of nature, of existence is not physical, but psychological and spiritual. Spirit, soul, consciousness are not only greater than inert matter and inconscient force, but they precede and originate these lesser things. All force is power, or a means of a secret spirit. The force that sustains the world is a conscious will, and nature is its machinery of executive power. Matter is body and field of a consciousness. Hidden within it, the material universe is a form and movement of the spirit. Man himself is not life and mind born of matter and eternally subject to physical nature, but a spirit that uses life and body. It is an understanding faith in this conception of existence and is the aspiration to break out in the end from this mind bound to life and matter into the greater spiritual consciousness that is the inmost sense of Indian culture. The Indian believes that the ultimate truths are the truths of the spirit, and that the truths of the spirit are the most fundamental and most effective truths of our existence, powerfully creative of the inner and salutary reformative of our outer life. Indian culture has held up the goal of a supreme, arduous, self exceeding as the summit of human endeavor. Indian spirituality, in its greatest eras and in its inmost significance, has not been a tired quietism or a conventional monasticism, but a high effort of the human spirit to rise beyond life of desire, vital satisfaction, and arrive at the acme of spiritual calm, greatness, strength, and illumination, divine realization, settled peace, and bliss. The question is whether such an endeavor is or is not essential to man's highest perfection. Danger is that the present dominant European ideas and motives, the temptations of the political needs of the hour, the velocity of rapid inevitable change will leave no room and no time for the growth of sound thought and spiritual reflection, and may strain to the bursting point the old Indian cultural and social system and shatter the ancient civilization. There is need to emphasize this aspect of our culture, for even though India is politically free, the danger of our culture is perhaps greater than ever before. Jawaharlal, after signing the third 5 year plan, said that it was a challenge to India, and I believe it was a challenge in more sense than one. It is a challenge, and it's a critical time of history when India stands at the crossroads. She has embarked upon a huge program of economic reconstruction, a program which may be said to be befitting her greatness. We all want to banish poverty from the land. More food, more goods of all kinds have to be produced. But the whole effort poses a question of supreme importance. Are we to be victims of the age, helplessly driven to be like others, or have we some contribution to make to the world's culture? Do we import problems with our plans, or do we accept the material advance and find a solution for the problems which is created for others? Let us produce more because more is necessary. But in the process of producing more material things, the higher values of culture should not be compromised. Let us not produce steel at the expense of the precious golden ore of human element and human material. Man is trying to overcome the limits of outer space today without overcoming the limitations of his own consciousness. He seems to be on the point of being overcome by his own achievement unless he changes himself. 40 years ago, Sri Aurobindo saw that mere political, economic, or social or any other external change would not solve the problem of life. And though all attempts may be necessary in the present state, the change that is required is psychological and inner change. And he pointed out at that time that the inner change needed was far more radical than merely embodying ethical values in life. Living up to ethical values and ideals can be a stage and an important step in the direction that is required in the change that is radical. A radical transformation of man's nature is needed. Such a radical change can come only by putting spirituality in the center of all human activities. Sri Aurobindo sees the course of Indian history as a gradual and a checkered growth towards a complete spiritual living. It is her It is her founding of life upon this exalted conception, her urge towards spiritual and eternal that constitute the distinct value of her civilization. And it is her fidelity, with whatever shortcomings, to this highest ideal that has made her people a nation apart in the world today. He therefore wants free India to accept boldly the challenge of the age and give to the world a lead in solving the problem of collective life by applying her spiritual ideals in the light of present history. He states a widest and the highest spiritualizing of life on earth is the last vision of all, that vast and unexampled seeking and experiment in a thousand ways of the soul's outermost and inmost experience, which is the unique character of India's past. This, in the end, is the mission for which she was born, and this is the meaning of her existence. There are deeper issues for India herself, since by following certain tempting directions, she may conceivably become a nation like many others, evolving an opulent industry and commerce, a powerful organization of social political life, an immense military strength, practicing power politics with a high degree of success, guarding and extending zealously her gains and her interests, dominating even a large part of the world. But in this apparently magnificent progression, forfeiting her own inmost call, her inmost being, losing her soul. Then ancient India in her spirit might disappear altogether, and we were only one more nation like the others, that would be real gain neither to the world nor to India. It would be a tragic irony of fate if India were to throw away her spiritual heritage at the very moment when in the rest of the world there is a more and more turning towards her for spiritual help and the saving light. A new creation of the old Indian Swadharma, function of her soul, transmutation to some law of Western nature, is our best way to serve and increase the sum of human progress. Either India will be rationalized, industrialized out of all recognition, and she will be no longer India, or else she will be the leader of a new world phase and aid by her example and cultural infiltration the new tendencies of the West and spiritualize the human race. That is the one radical and poignant question at issue. Will the spiritual motive of India, which India represents, prevail, or will Europe over Europe and create their new forms congenial to the West? Or will European nationalism and rationalism, commercialism put an end forever to the Indian type of culture? Creative assimilation is needed, a mastering and helpful assimilation of the new stuff into the eternal body has always been in the past the peculiar power of Indian genius. The renaissance of India is inevitable as the rising of the tomorrow's sun. And the renaissance of a great nation of 300 million people with so peculiar a temperament, such unique traditions and ideas of life, powerful and intelligence, a powerful intelligence, and so great a mass of potential energies cannot but be of the most formidable phenomenon of modern world. Sri Aurobindo has lived those great spiritual truths about which he has written, and he is the embodiment of the spiritual reality for which India stands, and which he affirms in his great works. He has contributed a body of vast literature embodying this vision of reality and making clear man's destiny on earth. He has built up, in collaboration with the Mother, an ashram which has grown into an international center for the seekers of spirituality, and he has started an international center of education where the younger generation may be prepared and molded for the future culture of man. Well, that gives the place of Sri Aurobindo in Indian Renaissance today. That was the subject matter scheduled for today's talk, which I give at Banaras University. I was called to lecture at the Banaras University in the December last, and this is the substance of the lecture which I gave to the Banaras University. Out of the 6, this is one.
I didn't get the name of the man who led the Arya Samaj movement.
Dayananda Saraswati. Dayananda.
Sort of a revival of that?
Yes, revival. It was, really speaking, a revolt against the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And the foundation of a new religion practically. Now it is very small in its size, but it has great influence. The influence was great because all the intellectuals were taken up. You see, 80% of the intellectuals of those generations were taken up by the Brahma Samaj. So the masses and the average and middle class also got a great impress of that movement. They all did not become Brahma Samaj members directly, but the thought, influenced them greatly, and great changes took place without their joining the Brahma Samaj formally. You see.
I mean, from what you read, shows that the realization is actually taking place in India. Spiritual realization.
Yes, yes.
Do you think it's not taking any place in any other?
Oh, why not? Why not? I don't say. Every culture has its religious life, and religious life has always meant, at least to some people, some experience. The difference is like this, that in other cultures, the ethical, religious, or spiritual strain has been one of the strains. The main strain being either politics or economics or literature or outer life, social life, and so on. Whereas in India, that was a central strain. And they have, in Indian life, you see, the country has risked its outer, material gains for maintaining the spiritual attitude. Consistently for more than 2000 years, there is hardly any other culture that has maintained spiritual value in the center of its cultural movement like India. That I can say without fear of contradiction. Religious values are everywhere, and religious experience has been all over the world. There can be no doubt about that. But those people who had religious experience were not the people who were in the center of the whole cultural life. Whereas in India, those were the people who had spiritual experience were the center of attention of the whole race. Everybody looked up to them. That is how Gandhi, in spite of having no political program, could lead a political party. You can't think of it in any other country. No, you cannot dare to think that in any other country you could have put that program and carried through even for 1 week. You couldn't. It is because the background is there and people say, oh, he is carrying out those values. They don't do it consciously. It is automatic. The atmosphere is only like that they immediately say, yes, that's right. It comes spontaneous. It's an instinct. And to form this instinct, they have sacrificed a lot of material gain. Lot of material gain. And they didn't look up outside. They always turned inwards. And this constant keeping of this inner realization as an important aspect of life has been the characteristic of this history. You see, this historical development. Of course, there are saints and sages and people of realization all over the world, probably. And it may be that people, some of them are unknown even, you see, and more perhaps are unknown than known people. But the collectively, if you look, probably that is the only collectivity where the living atmosphere of spirituality is felt, even by people who are not spiritual. This you can find anybody who comes to India. I know of an Austrian lady who remained in India for 38 years with her husband because there was some work. She went back to Australia. She couldn't remain there for more than 1 year and a half and came back to India. She said, no, she didn't understand anything of India. She was not an Indian in that sense. But she said, there is peace here in this atmosphere which I don't get there. Now, Australia is not overpopulated. Remember, Australia is not over. There are tracts and hundreds of miles where there is no population. So, if peace could come by want of population, there was enough peace in Australia. She didn't find it. She met me by pure accident. I asked her, why did you come back? She said, I couldn't remain there. There is peace here which I couldn't get there.
Also, she changed.
Probably by 37 years experience, she found that there was something in the atmosphere. I don't think they mix with Indians. You see, particularly these colonial people. Very few people mixed before. Now they are mixing a little more. But when Britishers were, there was an order almost, demi-official order. You must not mix with Indians if you are going to be an official. You are not expected to mix intimately with Indians. That's the only way to keep up your imperialism, you see. And those who mix were rare exceptions. Either visitors who came with a cultural mission or college people or, missionaries, they alone mixed and they mixed with their motives. Yes.
That's picture.
Huh?
Vivekananda.
Well, he made the first appearance in Chicago in 1892 or 3 in the Parliament of Religions, you see, and first he made this great impress of the universal attitude of India and brotherhood of man. The first found expression in him here. the greatest thing that struck, it was a parliament of religions really organized by the missionaries at the bottom. And the obstacles that were put in the path of Vivekananda to become a representative, you have to read the history of that. You'll be surprised to know what obstacles they tried to put so that Vivekananda may not be able to be a delegate of India in the Parliament of Religions. It's a history to study. He came as an unknown man. You're a sannyasi. In India, they don't care. Your passport is something which I learnt at the age of 60. There is the word passport. You go anywhere you like. The world is God's. You go. Then we found that no, you can't go anywhere. You must have a passport. Sannyasis don't understand this thing in India. You see, he thought that Madrasis people collected some money and said there was a parliament in Chicago. Let him go and speak for India. Will you go? He said, yes, if you send me, I'll go. So they collected money and gave him passage. Well, he came. He came here and nobody here knows him. Oh my God, New York, somewhere, and he was on the streets. But he didn't care. He lied on the streets. One lady saw him, it's a good chair. He came from no aristocratic family. Remember, he was not a pauper. He had a very big property which he renounced. He's a landowner, he's a jamindar. You see? The Datta family is a very aristocratic family of Bengal. So from his appearance, the lady knew that he comes from a good family, seems to be a good young man and very prepossessing appearance. So she asked him who he was. He said, I come from India. I have to go to Parliament of Religions. She said, Parliament of Religions? You have to become a delegate, you must be qualified, you must be selected, elected, all. There is a series of things to be done. So he said, I don't know, I want to go to Chicago. He said, you can't go like that. Well, she took interest in him and she provided him with a room and a house, and she wrote a letter and received a negative reply saying that nobody can be allowed to come like that. What is this? A sannyasi coming and becoming a representative and delegate in the Parliament of Religions? She fought out. And after the end of about a month or so, well, somehow or other he was allowed to be there. Then allowed to speak again. You see, the schedule is prepared and the program. So he said, I want to speak. When I come, the people have asked me to say something about India, so I have to come and I have to speak. Well, with growth of trouble, after all, he was allowed to speak. When he got up, somehow or other, the whole audience went in for him. Because he said, brothers and sisters of America. And everybody was, there was no ladies and gentlemen. There were no ladies and gentlemen. 1892, remember, 1892. First, he didn't want it. He's a sannyasi. It's not that he learned. What he spoke came like that. You see, he's no prepared speech. He speaks like me. Okay, what comes, comes. If doesn't come, doesn't come. So he said, brothers and sisters of America. They were all, what is this man? And he spoke of the divine in all and brotherhood of man, and that you are all divine and you are. She simply, for a short time, it is a very short address, but he carried the audience. And you can't imagine the chagrin with the Christian missionaries felt. You don't know. Oh, they felt, they felt like anything. Pursued him afterwards to see that he wouldn't have an audience here. I can tell you. But that is all right. That happens. Human nature is there. Nothing wrong. No complaint.
But do you have much of a following in India too?
They have, in the sense that Ramakrishna Mission has many branches. It's a big organization.
Yes, but I mean Vivekananda.
Did he work with Brother Krishna? Did
Hmm?
he work with
He was the chief disciple of Ramakrishna.
Oh, that's good.
He was the chief disciple of Ramakrishna.
But how do see? I can't understand how these people ignore the man his stature.
Well, his stature came out of that resistance. Resistance which he had to meet made his stature.
Because he was so highly educated.
Yes, he was, but people here didn't know. And secondly, those who knew didn't want. People here didn't know because he was a sannyasi, not saying I am a graduate of Calcutta University. It was not a qualification. He thought it was nothing. To be a graduate is nothing according to him. To be a sannyasi is something. To renounce for God is something. To get a degree is nothing. Oh, it was That too, it was a heroic fight.
Ultimately, the goal is to, we would say, to get rid of nationalism.
Yes, nationalism as it is today, certainly. Nationalism is already finding its limits, isn't it? Sovereignty of nation is already being limited.
For peace on earth, we've almost.
Yes, that is a unity of mankind is already in the offing and world is already one. So what has to be done is to realize the oneness of the world in our thought, in our feeling, in our expression and dealings. And let government do what it likes. It is a government business. What people have to do is to think and feel in terms of one world, you see. Not to forget the nation, because the nation has a culture. If it has a culture, then nation has to contribution to make if it is a cultured nation. And that cultural contribution is there for humanity. It's not that we have to say that we have nothing to give. We have something to give, but we give it in a family of brotherhood of man or oneness of human race. That the humanity is one. With that feeling, with that thought, and with that way of dealing, one has to mold his conduct and his inner life. Well, then the thing will come nearer, you see. Not so much by governmental action and resolutions as by promoting and living this feeling out.
I think Purani Murray wasn't here one day when we were discussing, that each nation has its contribution, each nation has its soul.
Yes.
And you were telling us what was the contribution of India to the life dream and what was the contribution of America, the United States, to the life dream. Could you repeat that for Marie? I think it clarified some things that you.
I think I was education.
Well, I think the question is whether India is going to lead the world spiritually.
I don't know, because in what you consider the leadership. It's not that it will come out on the stage and lead, I think. No, I don't think that will ever happen. There are ways of leadership. There are people who lead by remaining behind. There are some people who have they like not to be they want to be the people who manage from behind the scenes, you see, and that is better way of working. You'll be surprised to know that in Europe today, the influence of Indian culture is far greater than seen outside, far greater. It is not that a platform is there and a resolution is passed and everybody knows about it, but 50 people, 100 people, they understand the thing, they try to mold their life and follow the truth. Well, that is all that is India. It doesn't want a recognition. After all, it's not for saying that I am the leader. There is nobody who is the leader. Divine is the leader, really speaking. Isn't it? If India forgets, we would like other people to do what India wants mankind to do. Because we want the thing to be preserved. It's not India. If India is stupid enough to neglect, well, it doesn't matter. It's India's loss. But let mankind or some people in mankind or somebody in mankind retain this attitude and knowledge and this cultural value, because that is most important. It is not that it's not a special privilege of India or a special characteristic. Yes, it happens to have an atmosphere. It has the most favorable atmosphere, but if it rejects, well, it's India's loss. Let India lose. Let others gain. Why not? We'll take leadership from other people. If they embody the spiritual truth and live the spirituality, well, you see the instance of it is there in Pondicherry itself. Mother is French. You know that. And nobody objects to her being there. Nobody objects. People are happy to bow down to her and to accept her as somebody who has realized the divine consciousness. That is what we want. You see, it's not European or Indian that is important. It's the truth. And the effort to realize the truth. Whoever does it well, that is it. That is what is wanted today in mankind.
But firstly, I don't know where you are in this conversation now. What personally, when I think of spiritual guidance, I think of India because India has produced so many holy men, so many spiritually souls. I think of India for spiritual guidance, even though we also have.
That is what.
That doesn't mean that we don't have spiritual
Yes, Gabriel Mistral wrote that. I read that note here in one of my talks. Gabriel Mistral.
Yes.
She said that Tagore gave me this understanding of harmony and beauty, and Sri Aurobindo gave me religion. She said, I owe a great debt of gratitude to India and culture. Gabriel Mistral. She wrote in the Aryan Path. I put the quotation here in one of the talks.
What
Just
was it that someone said?
that is what I told in England also, the audience, when they asked me that, I said I come from a poor country first, and there are no industry and scientific progress to contribute and say, please take this from us. But we have something which you haven't got. And one thing we have is, well, fortunately, great personalities. And great personalities who think for the world only.
Yeah.
So that in within 40 or 30 years, you get a Tagore, you get a Gandhi, you get Sri Aurobindo, you get Ramakrishna Paramahansa, you get Raman Maharshi, you get Ram Das. You see half a dozen people who embody something like that. And because of the background, it's the atmosphere that creates, you see. And different phases like that, you see. One aspect of it and taken up on a universal scale, on the scale of humanity, and you get some understanding of values of life, what is good for the human culture. I mean, it's not meant for India only. Their contribution is for mankind. That is a special contribution of India to produce personalities.
Well, more than personality, very spiritual.
Yes, that's personalities who have that spiritual background and live some truth out in their life.
That's one reason we don't seem to have it as much here, too, is because we seem to be younger here in the United States. We're children.
So the vast portion of population here is busy with other values and very, very badly busy. I mean, they are earnestly busy. I don't blame them for being busy, but that is what it doesn't leave them any leisure or chance to do anything else. Probably. I mean, even if somebody has to do, he has to do it with a great effort at almost against the current, so to say. I know of 2 or 3 or 4 who really are living spiritual life, but they are almost doing against the current, so to say. You see, they think that they must steer clear of so many things before they are able to put their foot on the ground of spiritual life. You see.
You know what Mukherjee told me once? You know Mukherjee?
Yeah.
Mukherjee said.
Yes.
He told me one time, he said, if you're going to follow the spiritual, especially the Indian spiritual ideals, and it's something, you must never stop rowing on the oars, because the current is not with you. You would never stop rowing, he said. You keep rowing. Yes, I know you did, yes, I know. Purani, someone said to us that having 3 great souls in India at the same time. You've had Gandhi the doer, Ramana Maharshi the non-doer, and Aurobindo the seer, wasn't it?
No.
In India at one time, there were 3.
You can evoke, but you cannot do the work. The individual has to do. That is why in this work, individual is the leader. Mass movement or collective life will come afterwards. It must begin with the individual. You cannot have it from somebody else coming out and somebody passing a resolution and getting it done. It is the individual who must begin, and when several individuals have begun, you will get a group. That is the only way.
Of course, Purani, we had George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, people like that. In
Yes.
the beginning in this country is quite young.
Yes, they set a stamp of culture. You see, they set a stamp, a certain stamp that if you want to become true to the tradition of this country, you must live up to those values which they lived up to. You see, every American should look up to that. Well, that is not quite a small thing to do if that could be done.
The ocean.
Yes, because there is so much mixing of the culture, races also. You see different races inside, and then many historical conditions, and World War I and World War II coming in, and industrial progress and science, and it is a complex.
Well, all the countries and all nations are part of the one pattern, anyhow, aren't they?
They are going through, all are going through one process now. All are going through one process today.